Melissa,
Sarah,
what are we reading today?
we're reading Pick a Color by Suvankam Tamavangsa.
Ooh, looking forward to this one.
Happy almost birthday, Sarah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yes, we are on the eve of my birthday.
That's right. We often joke that, between the two of us and our families, other than your husband Josh, who's a little bit of an outlier, we really kind of squash all the birthdays into like a really short period of time. Because between you, me, Tom, and all of our kids, the birthdays are all between December and February, and then it's a done deal.
Yeah, really back to back. And like a lot of the like children's birthdays like match up with like either one another or a parent. So cuz like Douglas's birthday is very close to your birthday. My birthday is very close to Tom's birthday. And then Violet and William are like just like 3 days apart and so many years, but all very very rapid succession in birthdays. So
That's so
I
true.
look at it as a good sign. I do.
Yeah, it's like we're in like that synergy, that connection is like really intense between us and our families. I had never thought about that matchup with everybody. It's like these little clusters within a clump, but it's so true.
Yeah, I think it's special. It's just to me another sign that we're all just meant to be connected and we're connected in more than one way. But one really lovely memory, because we're always reminiscing about our grad school days. Tom and I, in January of 2008, had a joint birthday party at the row house that I was living in St. John's. And it was a bit of a shindig, lots of people. It was a themed party, which, we were known to have themed parties at that time. And it was one of the more unforgettable parties, although some of my memories might be a little bit hazy from that night, but it was a good one.
It was a good one. In fact, just yesterday, my Facebook feed, reminded me of that night. All those pictures popped up in my Facebook memories, which are, you say what you like about Meta and the Zuckerberg universe. Getting those memories sometimes is like a pretty sweet little gift from the universe kind of thing. But I took a pleasant trip down memory lane when those pictures popped up in my feed. And I couldn't help but, juxtapose them against how absolutely different Tom's birthday was this year. We did not celebrate with nearly as much pizzazz. He and I weren't even in the same town as one another. We were sort of separately following and supporting our kids in their extracurricular pursuits. But on the other hand, I know that you did celebrate your birthday in style, slightly ahead of time over the weekend. Anyone who follows us on social media, which I hope is everybody watching, and they can hop on over to Instagram or Facebook, wherever they are, and follow us in those places. But all of us who are on those platforms saw some beautiful pictures of your trip to Provincetown, I believe it's called, on the weekend. The photos were lovely. Tell us all about it.
Yes. So for those who are not super familiar with the geography of the state of Massachusetts in the northeastern states, I went to Provincetown, which is at the very tip of the Cape Cod Peninsula, which kind of looks like an arm that's like flexing. It would be kind of at the fist area of that arm, at the very tip of Massachusetts. So it's an old kind of seafaring town, like a lot of like Portuguese heritage. But over the last several decades, it's kind of become like an East Coast um, kind of, I don't know, vacation town for, a lot of in LGBTQ plus members. And it's full of art, it's full of culture. It's got a really quaint downtown, which I was astounded by the sheer number and volume of restaurants and bars and shops. galleries. I hit up a beautiful outdoor gallery that was in an alleyway that was dedicated to artists who had, been frequenters of Provincetown who had passed away. Um, about 80% of those shops and bars and restaurants were actually closed. But it was my first time visiting Provincetown, and I specifically picked it because I'd never been there before. I'd been to Cape Cod, but I'd never been specifically to Provincetown. But also, I knew that in the summer months, it's very, very busy. It's very, very expensive, and it takes a long time to get there because of traffic. And so I thought, well, this is the dead of winter, and I'm going to a, tip of a peninsula out into the Atlantic town. So I knew it was going to be cold. So not a lot of people there. So it was a really good opportunity to just kind of explore this little town in a quiet way and just see everything that it has to offer. And, although it has its own very distinct kind of culture, one of the things that struck me as someone who had lived in St. John's, Newfoundland for, about 5 years of my life, that kind of through line of these like a little bit kind of removed or detached cities or towns on the water, and the way that art and culture kind of play a role in making them very vibrant places. So I really kind of felt like a kinship with Provincetown because of that feeling. And one of the cool things that I was able to do, they have several bookstores. I did only really hit up one, but there's a bookstore called East End Books. There's another one that's called Tim's Used Books. And then the one that I ended up shopping at was called the Provincetown Bookshop. And that is actually Cape Cod's oldest bookstore. It was founded in 1932, which is very cool. And they're known for having like a curated collection with like a local focus, which, we love local literature. And again, like a LGBTQ plus focus. And so I ended up picking up 3 books while I was there. So if you recall, Melissa, when we were doing our kind of year end recap and talking about what we were planning to do in 2026, I had mentioned that, of course, I had gotten an Amazon Kindle and I was feeling like a little bit morally, confused about my usage of that. And I said that, to offset my, participation in this like big corporation, I wanted to make it a point to go and support local bookstores. And so, what a perfect opportunity being in Provincetown, going to this old bookstore, which I mean, God, almost 100 years old. And of the 3 books, I feel like this again, going back to the kind of New Year's resolution and reading, I got 2 local books. So the first one, I'm going to hold it up, is called Land's End, A Walk Through Provincetown by Michael Cunningham. This book was actually published in 2002, so it's a little bit of an old one, but it was recommended by the bookseller at the shop. And if you notice, signed copy, which is always exciting. And it's a bit of a slim volume, but I'm looking forward to reading it. And then the other book I got that was a local book is called Helltown, which is a very popular nickname for Provincetown.
Oh.
And apparently, little did I know, but there was like a series of murders that happened in Cape Cod. And so this whole book is dedicated to the story of like a serial killer that was on Cape Cod. So it's a bit of like kind of, like a true crime type book. It's quite large, so the opposite of the other one. So we're talking like 480 something pages for this one. But I was really happy to pick up 2 kind of local Provincetown stories or books. And then the other book that I got was Heated Rivalry, which has been all over kind of pop culture, Instagram, all over the internet, because there is a very popular series that was produced and filmed in Canada, and it's based on a book series. And so I got one of those books. The author is from Nova Scotia. Her name is Rachel Reed. So that was another one, another link to my New Year's resolution. I wanted to read more like Atlantic Canadian authors. And so, wow, got a chance to do that too. So I'm currently reading that one and I'm going to read these ones. And who knows, they might end up popping up on the pod. I might want to talk
That
about them. But that was my, in a nutshell, that was my trip to Provincetown. It was really lovely. A
That's
way to
so
kind of,
great.
yeah, to
I
ease into
have
my
to
birthday.
ask. Okay, so, and I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot. We have not
It's okay.
previously, discussed this, but you brought up Helltown. I think that's the
Yeah,
name of the book that you held up there.
it is.
And
Yeah.
I know that you had procured a copy of Murder in the Village or Murders in the Village, Justin Ling. Did you get a chance to
Yeah.
read that?
I haven't. So maybe that
Yeah.
could be like a fun like companion read where I read one and then read the other. And both having I now I don't know who or what or anything about this. This
Hmm.
just was a very popular book that was kind of all over Provincetown. And so we'll see if there are any kind of connective through lines between the two books, and which are obviously taking place in very distinct places,
Yeah.
but yeah, I do have that book. It's just over next to me, so yeah, that's definitely going to be a 2026 read as well. So
I'm glad that you also gave a little bit of context in terms of like geography of where you actually were.
yeah.
And our last episode, which was an audio only episode, so we weren't here in the
Hmm.
Rogers studio for this, but when we talked about The Winner by Teddy Wayne, was that
Yep.
not also set in around that area?
So it was set in coastal Massachusetts. It was not specifically Cape Cod. Cape Cod is definitely referenced in the book, but it's kind of like its own little fictional place. Cutter's Neck is the name of the kind of little peninsula that story takes place in, but Cape Cod certainly is referenced. And then just to kind of put it in even more like kind of geographical terms, like it was about a 3-hour drive from where I am in Connecticut. So it was, I think it's like more like a 5 or 6 hour drive if you're going there in the summer, just because of traffic. But very
Mm.
cool nonetheless. And I, again, happy to kind of be, meeting up with my intentions for reading for this year already so early in the year, not even through January yet. But Melissa, I just want to kind of switch gears. I know that you're not necessarily in the market for buying a bunch of new books because, unlike me, you were gifted several titles over the Christmas holiday. And, one of those gifted books is the one that we're going to be talking about today. So, would you like to tell me a little bit about Pick a Color by Suvankam Tamavangsa?
Yes, I did actually get quite lucky in terms of how many books I got for Christmas. Although interestingly, this one was under the Christmas tree, but I was the giver of this gift and not the the receiver of this gift. But true to form, I gave it to Tom and then promptly took it for myself to read. Regular listeners of the show know that we have the full collection of Giller Prizes, and this is or Giller Prize winners, and this is because Tom and I, and Sarah for that matter, we all met in a class where we were reading a lot of Giller Prize winners. And so then when Tom and I got married, part of my wedding present to him on our wedding day was to give him all of the Giller Prize winners up to that point. And so we got married in 2010. The Giller Prize started in 1994. So, I had to give him whatever it was, 16 titles at that point. I looked at it before I came in here because there was actually a tie in the year 2000. They must have done something special for the new millennium. So we were at 16 titles at that point. And of course, now we're up to 32 if we count the tie, because this book, Pick a Color, was the Giller Prize winner for 2025. So as part of our tradition, I gave it to him for Christmas, and then was very compelled to read it early in the year because it's getting a ton of great publicity, I guess, but rightfully so. So it's funny because a lot of times when I was listening to different reviews or just other promotional materials for this book, they kept referencing Suvankam Tamavangsa's debut novel. And it would throw me every time. Like I'd be ready to dispute this as a fact because there was no way in my mind that someone who is so prominent in the Canadian literary scene, who is so prolific in their writing, that we'd be talking about them in a debut kind of context. You know, as long as we're talking Giller Prize, on my other side here, I have How to Pronounce Knife, which is also by Subhankam Tamavangsa, and it was the winner of the Giller Prize a few years ago, but it's a collection of short stories. So previously, her works have been, you know, short fiction, poetry, and this is indeed her first novel. But I was really interested in the fact that, you know, as established as she is, this is the first time that she's put out a full-length novel. Not to say it too is a relatively short book, but it has absolutely lived up to my expectations. I really did love How to Pronounce Knife, and this book does not disappoint.
Well, I am very happy to hear that, Melissa, because as you know, Pick a Color is on my TBR for 2026. And I've actually put in a specific request at my local library in the town that I live in. Because we were talking about other titles the last time I had stopped in to renew my library card. And I mentioned that book and they looked it up. And so I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they will have ordered it and I will be able to get it from my local library. But certainly, if it's not there, I am going to be picking that one up and buying it. So I am really looking forward to reading it. So I would love for you to give me a summary and speak openly about the book, but please, no spoilers.
Absolutely. I will say, like, oh, I'll do my best, but I know this is not the type of book that is spoilable. I don't think it can be spoiled. I don't think it's the type of book really that you read sort of like for the ending, right? I think you're reading for the experience of it. So even being able to discuss it ahead of time might even enrich your reading experience. Maybe I'm giving myself a little too much credit right off the hop. But as I was reading it, you know, Tom had asked me at a couple points, you know, how are you finding it? How is it? Which, you know, fair play, it was his book. And I had kind of taken it, you know, pretty quickly after giving it to him. And I am kind of known to use like consumption language or kind of those sorts of metaphors, like around almost like eating when it comes to books. Like I'm always saying things like, oh, I gobbled it up or I devoured it if it's a book that I really liked and that sort of thing. And I did kind of go to that same type of imagery when I was talking about my experience with this book, but it was a lot less intense. Like, and I recognize that this is like super dramatic language, but I was describing the book as like this pool of like clean, clear water that I would go to and like cup my hands and like take a drink from, and then I would just like let it nourish me and hydrate me, and then I would go back again for some more. Like, it was just something that it's a short book and you totally could read it in like a couple of sittings, no trouble. But I wouldn't recommend that. Like, I feel like it's the type of book you need to kind of like take in like in pieces and like allow yourself to like digest, you know, and just really let it kind of percolate before you go back for more, just to enjoy it more. So as far as the story itself goes, the book is set in a nail salon, and it takes place over the course of one day. So we're very much in the sort of same place and time throughout the entire book. The author, or the narrator, I should say, does bring us to different points in time and different places, but always sort of anchored and rooted in this nail salon that she runs. So the narrator, her name is Ning, and she owns this nail salon, but she's also formerly a pro boxer. So that also kind of informs the character and what she's like. It's entirely told from Ning's perspective too. So everything that we get comes by way of her and her perspective on the world. She has a staff of women that work there, and she does have a relationship with each of them, but it's very much about her and about how she understands the world based on the people that she interacts with, whether that's through conversations that she has with clients who are coming into the shop, or even sort of like nonverbal cues that she can pick up with them through the interactions that she has with them as clients who she's working with by doing their nails, say.
And I feel like a nail salon is a setting. Like there's so much that can be done with that setting because it's a place where there's like a lot of vulnerability. Like I guess on behalf of the clients because they're seeking out an aesthetic treatment in this intimate way. We bear our flaws. Our hands are so important to everything we do. Our feet, I always think about going and getting a pedicure and like seeing people around me and how ticklish the bottoms of their feet may be and like and you're also revealing like these like intimate parts of yourself and looking to kind of get them fixed by strangers. And so how does the author bring that feeling of intimacy or vulnerability onto the page?
Yeah, I think like intimate and is like one of the most like key themes. That intimacy is one of the key themes to the book overall. And I think like for the most part, the majority of women have visited a nail salon at some point in their life. So it's a very easy environment to kind of like automatically place yourself into when you're reading the book. You can really kind of like feel what it's like in there. You know the smells, kind of even like the quality of the air, what the lighting is like. You've been in that environment. And they tend to also be, for the most part, very homosocial kind of environments too. So there is a lot of times sort of like this sisterhood that sort of gets acted upon in these types of environments. And you start having conversations with people that you do not know that are much more deeply personal than you would typically have with people who are strangers. And I know that it's common for women to interact in that way, like to share from common experiences and sort of that shared, background. But I feel like it's particularly pronounced in this type of environment. And I wondered a little bit too, just about that interaction with someone who is, if you picture getting your nails done, there's also like a disalignment, right? You're not face to face with the person. So sometimes you tend to disclose maybe a little bit more. And also that person is, they're sort of occupied in a way, they're doing something. So they're also not staring at you. You're not making a ton of eye contact. And it does kind of create this sense of anonymity, which leads to that intimacy as well, or in even a more complex way than just than intimacy can be in other situations. And I feel like that is also something that the author does really well in this book, because the story is being told from the person giving the pedicure, not from the person getting the pedicure. And that's typically not how these stories go. So I really appreciated like the shift that happened there and where it was sort of positioning me within that interaction. And you get a lot happening amongst all of the workers in the nail salon. And it is probably interesting, I found it interesting to point out that the salon itself is called Susan's. And then all of the women who work there wear name tags. But Ning, who owns the shop, decided to just buy a bunch of name tags that say Susan, because it's a very sort of like easy to pronounce, easy to remember Anglo name. And so she just thought, well, I'll just buy the one name tag a bunch of times and we'll call the place Susan. And then it's also kind of like a bit of a tactic, right? If someone says, oh, can I get an appointment with Susan? Of course you can. Susan's never sick.
Sure.
Susan's always there. You always remember Susan's name and to ask for her. So the Susans, and that they are referred to as that in the book, they have a really interesting dynamic amongst themselves as well, because although they're speaking with the clients, and maybe the clients are speaking with one another, and the common language in the room is English, the Susans also speak another language. And so there's a layering of conversation that ends up happening too, in the sense that they're speaking with the clients, but then they have this conversation that's happening amongst them about the conversation happening with the clients. And there's a really interesting layering of conversation and experience happening in those times.
Yeah. The idea that there's so much happening all at once and that not everybody is fully aware of everything that's happening. And I'm even thinking about my own experiences and even experience with you, Melissa. Like, I don't know if you recall when you were living in upstate New York, I had come up for a visit, and we ended up going to a nail salon together. And I will not go into details about the story that I was telling you, but it was quite a story. And I remember thinking, like, oh, like, I'm sure, you and I are having this conversation, but then no doubt the people who are doing our nails and are listening in are probably having their own conversation or will have their own conversation about this. So I feel like I really love that idea of everything happening and all the kind of perceptions that are going on and what people are thinking about and what they're talking about and how they're kind of perceiving one another. But how would you like really describe these, I guess I'll call them like sub conversations that are happening?
Firstly, I have to confess, I do remember getting my
Oh,
nails done with you in the mall at that time. I do not recall
yep.
what this conversation was or the story you were telling me, so I am absolutely going to follow up with you separately about this to figure it out. But in any
Okay.
case, the conversations amongst the workers, I think I would call them playful, and I think that's deliberate. I think the author, in the same way that she's playing with this idea of having the Susans and the Susan name tag, she is kind of playing with this common experience, like you said, that we've had and most women have had in nail salons. So there is a playfulness to it, almost this sense of like, oh, we have a secret language. But it's not done in a way that's like aggressive or exclusionary. And there's even at least one instance in the book when it becomes clear that the woman has recognized that the client becomes aware that they're speaking about her. And they just tell her what they've said, almost in a way that felt like they had forgotten that they were sort of code switching in that way. And it wasn't that they were caught, it was just that they recognized that there was a disconnect and that they owed it to her to just be honest with her and what they had said. So it was never, it's never presented in a way that's meant to be like hurtful to the client. But I think what I found particularly interesting with that piece of it is something that the author talked about quite a few times in some of the different interviews that I had listened to. And she was really like interested in portraying the distinction between knowledge and intelligence. And she talked about knowledge, not in like a, oh, knowledge is a commodity kind of way, but she was very clear about her understanding of knowledge as something that you could just get, that it was something you could acquire, whether you had, if you had enough money and could buy your education somewhere or pay for education. If you can get training in some way or get a teacher or get a manual, knowledge is something that you can procure. Whereas intelligence, on the other hand, is something that is more so cultivated. And in the context of this book, I think she's portraying or she's trying to impart upon us the fact that that intelligence around people comes from observing. And I know you were making a joke before saying about like, oh, I'm sure these women were listening to us talking and, I bet they talked about it afterwards. But when you have so many people coming through a particular space and you're listening to them all the time and they are disclosing these very personal situations, obviously you have this opportunity to really develop an intelligence around people and around how people interact with each other. And so, they have on a number of occasions heard women talk about very similar situations and how they handled them and what the result was. And so they are building up this knowledge, but also, and maybe more importantly, this intelligence around how to kind of see things in a bigger picture as opposed to just like moments or instances.
I really like that. And I'm even thinking about the ways in which we often experience going into like a nail salon, and either we're going by ourselves, that's a common occurrence, or if we're going with other people, it tends to be, again, you talked about this being kind of like, a sisterhood, but a lot of times it's like mothers and daughters, it's sisters, it's best friends, it's people who have these connections. And I could imagine, as being someone who's working in and day out and seeing all of these different types of people coming in with all of these different types of relationships, like really getting to understand like those little unspoken like dynamics that exist between people. I do want to go back though to something that you mentioned before. You had said at the beginning of your description that Ning formerly was a boxer, which is like such a specific detail and kind of an interesting juxtaposition in one way to, now being this nail salon owner. Does she or how does she bring boxing into, this story? Like, is there recollections or are there any comparisons, anything like that?
Yeah, it's sort of woven throughout the book, and every time so deliberately. Like it's present in the book, and you're never surprised when suddenly she's talking about boxing. It does feel like it kind of comes out of left field in the beginning when you're like, oh, she's going to be a boxer. And I was a little bit apprehensive, to be honest. I was like, oh, is this going to be some whole big thing about, it wasn't. It wasn't like it was present without being sort of overly in your face. It didn't feel like a reach in terms of bringing these two worlds together. And I do think there are two worlds, right, that have their own sort of codes and norms and expectations and patterns of behavior and language, that she does bring these two worlds together. And the more that I think about it, the more connections that I see, even just in terms of precision, right? Like when she's talking about doing someone's nails, it's very delicate work. It's, you're working on a small surface, but there's this expectation of perfection and precision. But even in terms of like the intimacy themes that we talked about before, or that idea of having this really refined intelligence around something, they all sort of speak to each other as well in both of these worlds. And one example in particular, Ning talks about when you're in the ring, there's a place, I think it's like on the neck or the collarbone or something, and she would always keep her eyes on that part of her opponent's body because it was actually there that you could have a better and a faster understanding of where their next move would be. And so there is also a lot of discussion around movement and anticipating people's behaviors, anticipating people's movements, and that she had sort of this really refined ability of reading other people by looking at their neck and sort of getting this sense of like where things were going to go next. So I did think, like, even though it was a little bit startling to see it as one of the main parts of the book, that this was a former boxer turned nail salon owner, it worked so nicely together, and did the kind of, like I was saying before, shift my perspective into like spaces that I hadn't really considered before.
I can actually really see, like, I love this idea of her looking at like this certain part of like the neck or the collarbone to really kind of be able to predict what this next move was going to be on someone. And I think of like this idea of micro expressions and the intelligence that's involved with being able to read micro expressions, and how from the perspective of a boxer, because not that I'm a boxer myself or know really much about it, but I do have friends who have like kind of taken it up as an extracurricular, and yeah, there's a lot of kind of focus and detail from anything from like your footwork to your breath work to, yeah, being able to like observe your opponent. And yeah, thinking about that in like a salon, and if there are differences in language or there's multiple languages being spoken, sometimes we do rely on micro expressions more than we realize to fully understand what somebody is thinking or what they're feeling. And I like your idea of the perfectionism that goes into something like doing nails, the delicate work that entails, but also, I mean, these are like sharp instruments that you're using to trim and file nails. Like if it's a pedicure, there's hot water involved and like a lot of attention to how somebody's feeling. I this is like a little aside, but like I cut my son's nails. He's not old enough to do it yet, and I'm constantly like having an issue with like, am I cutting them too short? Am I hurting him? Because I can't feel it myself, and so of course he's very vocal about what he likes and what he doesn't like, but it's a little bit of a different I don't know the word I'm looking for, like almost like conduct or, what you're doing in terms of like how you're expressing yourself in those situations. You're always trying to be polite or, oh, that's a little too sharp or that's it. And so I feel like in that kind of environment, like you're looking at the client, if you're from the perspective of the person who is working in that environment, and you're reading them and trying to figure out like, okay, do they like this? Is this good? Are they happy? And as well as all the other kind of communication that you're doing. So thank you for letting me kind of go off on an aside about
No,
that.
it's
But
true.
I
In
really
fact,
like the connection.
yeah. There's a
I
moment
really
in the
like the
book
connection
actually
between.
when one of the clients has a blister on the side of their foot. And so there's, again, in this sort of idea of like, okay, anticipating and basically the Susan who's working on his foot, and it is a male character because there's all sorts of different iterations of people who come in. There's a bridal party, and there's a guy who's like a local celebrity who comes in, and so lots of different types of people come through this space. And again, always bringing sort of their own intimacy or their own intimate world, and then taking it with them again when they go. But this particular gentleman is getting his feet done, and they pierce the blister, and he has like an outburst of reaction. But then Ning spends sort of the rest of the book in this tension around, is he going to come back and have that outburst again? So yeah, just when you mentioned about like you're trying to kind of navigate these like really delicate sort of thresholds between pleasure and pain and satisfaction and dissatisfaction, that's all kind of explored, for lack of a better word, as well in the book too.
I mean, I think really from what I'm getting so far, it does feel like there's a lot going on in this book, especially considering that it is like a relatively short read. Um, does it ever feel cluttered with so many different kind of themes happening in such a short piece?
I can say it absolutely doesn't. And I can see how it would appear that way, because even as I'm going through sort of all these different moments that are brought up and all these different like areas that she's able to touch on, I can see how you might understand it as like, oh, there's maybe too much happening in, I think, what ends up being 180 pages. But it's always so succinct, so clear, so direct, so kind of calm and controlled in the delivery that it never feels cluttered. And it never feels dense either. Like, it has depth to it, but it doesn't feel dense. And I know some people love a book that has lots of density and whatever. That doesn't always necessarily resonate with me. But I felt like it had like a lightness, even though it had this depth. And I couldn't help but also think about Claire Keegan. And when she was asked about the length of Small Things Like These, which is probably half the length of this, actually, and I guess because people loved it so much, they wanted more of it. And so when she was asked, why didn't you write a longer story, or why didn't you give us, more? And she said, I think the phrasing was, it's as long as it needed to be. And that's so true. I mean, that's part of what made it such a beautiful book, is that we had everything that we wanted. We weren't really we weren't lacking more, but we wanted more, we craved more because it was so good. And I think there's something to that as well with this book, that it has everything it needs to be a solid sort of standalone piece of work. But Suphankham Thomavongsa has described herself as a writer of absence. And I think that's interesting in the sense of, like I said, her prior work, even though they had such resonance and they were so powerful and celebrated, poetry, short fiction, and even when she's in this novel format, it's a relatively short novel. And I like this idea of this writer of absence kind of thing. And the reason that she was describing herself in that way in the interview that I was listening to is because she was being asked about the fact that Ning is missing a finger. And although it's not a huge like plot point in the book, the sort of presence of that absence is always very accessible within the story, even though you don't necessarily have we never find out what happened to her finger, and it's kind of irrelevant. but the story always kind of comes back to it. So it's almost like this sense of like it gives us more by giving us less, and this idea of being a writer of absence. And I do have a little passage that I'll kind of maybe segue into there. And just by way of setting it up, I had kind of put together some of the notes that I wanted to talk about, and I was, getting ready to come here, and I thought, I don't even have a passage. Like, I felt like it was such a beautifully written book. I'd really want to be able to share kind of what that voice sounds like, because we are so intimately connected with Ning that it does feel like, it would be a bit of a disservice to anyone who's listening to this to not at least get like a little fragment or a little taste of it. And I just opened it at random. Like, I just opened the book because I just felt like it was so consistently good that wherever I sort of picked up would be, and there would be some nugget there that would do some of the work of illustrating some of the stuff that we've been talking about. And it was true. I basically just fanned the pages open and I landed here. So it's page 63. So we're certainly in the first half of the book. And she's doing the nails of a waitress. Okay. I get to the waitress's left finger, where a wedding ring would be if she had one. This is the finger I don't have. And I spend time there massaging her knuckle, remembering what it was like to have this. I hold her finger and press into it, making a circle with my thumb, wishing a ring right there for her. She looks down at my hand and notices. I don't hide what I don't have. I spread the space I do have wider. Pinky finger and middle finger go their separate ways. I know she wants to ask me about that, the missing finger, but she's too polite. It's not recent. I forget it's not there sometimes and go about like it's still there. It's turned out to be a kind of superpower at work. For one thing, the finger is not in the way. There's more space to perch a client's toe or fingernail to paint. We don't get all tangled up in one another. The waitress says something. I ask her to repeat it. Once you zone out on someone, it can take a while to come back. It's like being underwater, a quiet hum and then resurfacing. Learning how to take it all in and adjust to the new surrounding sounds. She says she has her period and seeing all that blood makes her sad. It just means there's no life there and reminds her she doesn't have anyone serious. I don't add to that. She says at work she sees people on date nights all the time. Their shining skin, the low whispers. She can tell who is in love and who isn't. I ask her how she can tell. People in love don't notice her. When she brings them food and drinks, or when she comes by to ask them if there's anything else they need, she might have to ask a few times. She asks me if I can tell, at the nail salon, if someone's in love. I think for a moment. I guess I see them a lot here, picking and grooming and wanting me to tell them they look good. Sometimes they just say it outright when I've got them in the chair. They just come right out and say it. People in love are boring, if you want to know the truth, but I don't tell her that. And I do think it does such a nice job, even like now that I'm like going back and reading that segment after having read the whole book, just the idea of the presence and absence of this thing when she says, I can't hide what I don't have. I just thought like, that's such an interesting way of phrasing something. But then this conversation, this like truly intimate and personal conversation she's having with this person, but she's also, she's doing her job, she's working, she's kind of zoning in and out of the conversation, but I think it also does a nice job of illustrating what that nail salon space is like. Like someone just completely disclosing about their period to a complete stranger and what that deeply means to them about, infertility. And it's just all kind of happening within this 1 hour interaction with someone. And I was so pleased that I was able to find that passage in that moment.
Yeah, what a beautiful, and I'm going back to, at the very beginning when you're talking about reading this book and the process of it or the experience of it feeling like, kind of cupping your hands and like softly drinking water and then wanting to come back to it. Like even you just reading that passage, like I kind of like was like, oh, this is there's something like so soothing about it just to listen to you reading it. Yeah, like so lovely. And I kept thinking like as you were reading that passage about the fact that, the current client that she's working on is a waitress, and how the waitress is kind of invisible to people who are in love. And that's not unlike when you're working in any kind of service industry and you're going in to have a certain experience, the people who are helping you are in a weird way like kind of invisible to you. Like you're kind of in your own world experiencing it, whatever it might be, whether you're going shopping or whether you're going to a restaurant or whether you're going to get your nails done. And I feel like that also brings us back to this whole idea of like she's a writer in absence, like, and how it's those absences. It's just like, when you listen to music, there was a quote I had heard a long time ago. God knows who said it. When it was like, one of the things that we love the most about music isn't the music itself, it's the spaces and the pauses between the notes. And I feel like that is connected to a story like this. It's like, it's those spaces that allow you to think about those observations, and spaces that allow you to think about the way that someone is perceiving a moment, and like what an interior experience it is for Ning in that moment, but that there is this like connection. I don't know. I feel like I'm flapping, but I really appreciate it. I think that's beautiful. And I'm also recalling a conversation that we had on an episode a couple of years ago. We had talked to a former classmate of ours, Everton McLean, and we were talking about a collection of short stories. And we were talking about the skill that it takes to be able to successfully write a story, and to do it in such a small amount of time, or just a limited number of pages. And that so, in a weird way, is like almost more of a testament to somebody's ability to write than someone that writes, like a 600 or 800 page book. And that's not to like disparage someone who writes like long form, but that there is a certain kind of skill in being able to capture someone's imagination and to make you feel connected in some way to the characters or to the story in, less than 200 pages. Like, what a wonderful thing that is. So I don't know. Just thank you.
It's
I
so
feel
true.
moved from that passage.
And I think that, again, we've talked about this in other instances, but it's also about the resonance of things, and once we do let them sit, right? Like what our relationship is with a book, a year after we read it, right? Have we completely forgotten it? Is it like one of those situations when you're like, I'm pretty sure I read that book, but I can't remember what happened? Or is it like the type of book that, something sparks within you in your life, and it forces you to recall that book, right? Like how it lives on in your brain and in your mind long term. And I think that this is that type of book, right? That it's the type of book you want to go back to. And you mentioned too about like just listening to it. Like I think because it's so artfully written, it is pleasant to just listen to. And I actually went and listened to the audiobook sample because I could see this being the type of book that I want to go back to and listen to again, and experience it all over again, knowing what I know and having spent time with the character, and then having spent time reflecting on the character. And I had been listening to these various interviews, and the author's voice is actually beautiful. Like her speaking voice is so pleasing. It's so calm. You can really like, you can understand, you can hear her voice in her writing very clearly. And I was actually hoping that the reader for the audiobook would be the author. Because again, to go back to this idea of intimacy, any book that I've ever listened to that was read by the author, it's like, it just is like almost inherently better because it doesn't feel like overproduced. But having said that, the reader that they've chosen for this book sounds excellent, just from the short excerpt that I listened to. But if anyone is like thinking about getting into audiobooks or something, like I know we talked about The Listeners by Jordan Tannehill. That is like an excellent first audiobook to listen to. But in the second place, I think that like I would recommend this one highly as an audiobook, even though I haven't listened to the whole thing yet. I think it's like
Mm.
either in both cases, right? You're in that, it's a first person telling, right? So it would be a really nice one to read as an audiobook. And it's also just, I think, a testament to the fact that this is a voice and a character and a perspective that I want to spend more time with, I guess, too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like in terms of like if you're just starting to get into audiobooks too, like a book that is shorter is it's not as much of a intimidating thing, or it's not as much of a commitment because you know that you don't have like 8 hours ahead of you of like listening to, somebody. But and then of course I feel like the true testament to an audiobook is just getting like absorbed into whatever it is that you're listening to, and feeling connected to those characters and to that story. But um this is great. I'm loving the way you haven't given anything away, which I really appreciate as someone who fully intends to read this book, uh hopefully sooner rather than later. But it really does give me like a good feeling of like what the act is like to read this book. Um, I do want to ask one more thing, and it's really like Ning herself as a character. Like, would you describe her as a happy character, as someone who you know she is so perceptive, and she is clearly someone who has like a lot of kind of interior life to her, but like, do you feel like this is a story that like is a more of a positive, from that perspective of Ning's character, or do you think, how would you characterize her? Is she a happy person? Is she not?
Right. Yeah. No, I think she's a happy person. And I think she's probably at her happiest when she's in this nail salon. And I think about it in terms of, her relationship with with the staff members there. I think certainly she has almost this feeling of like she's a bit of a matriarch in a way, because I think that she feels that having this salon actually gives people a purpose, and it gives them employment, and they're able to sort of like sustain themselves and live a fulfilled life and that sort of thing. But there's this part, and it happens twice in the book actually. So although the book happens almost exclusively within the nail salon, she does leave the space on a few occasions. But I mean, like, leaves by like goes out on the sidewalk or goes into the alleyway next door kind of thing. She doesn't go far. And while she's out there doing whatever it is she's doing, there's a couple of times where she says she misses the smell of the nail polish. She wants to get back in the smell. And I mean, if that's not a sign of like loving a place, if you like the smell of it, I don't know what would be.
Yeah.
But it almost felt like the opposite of like when you smell something and it takes you back to a certain time. Like I was thinking of like Play-Doh, like when my kids were little and they play with Play-Doh and I'd smell it, like I would immediately be like a kid again. Like it brings you back. So I felt like it was a bit of a play on that kind of idea. But I definitely think she's a happy person, and that she's happiest in this place. And although there's a lot of complexity in terms of like the layers of emotion that are conveyed here, overall I felt like the tone was like positive, and it was a positive and pleasant reading experience.
That's good that we can use more of that in this world, for sure. Well, I kind of have a feeling that I know what your ultimate judgment of this book will be, but I do want to ask the important question that we always ask during these episodes. Is Pick a Color by Suvankam Tamavangsa a could read, a should read, or a must read?
Well, I am happy to report that Pick a Color by Suvankam Tamavangsa is a must read. This book for me, it lived up to all of my expectations, all of the hype. It is truly worthy of its award-winning attention. I felt like it introduced me to characters and perspectives that I hadn't really considered or had the opportunity to consider. It shifted my perspective, but it was in a way that was very clear, very calm, very direct, and very pleasant. like I said, this was just not necessarily a book that I would call a page turner. You know, this book had a positive sort of tenacious energy, even though I wouldn't describe it as gripping. It was the type of book that I may not have reached for it, but it called to me. And when I would go to it, I would just be able to sort of peel off a layer, you know, and just take it in and digest it and learn from it. And I'm already kind of like excited to see how this book might sort of pop into my consciousness or my experience in other ways in the future. So I am absolutely pleased to announce that it is, for me, a must read.
Ah, that's wonderful. I believe it's our first must read of 2026. So,
Yes,
ah,
I think so.
excellent. I look forward to reading it. I have no doubt that it will probably hit me in some of the same places that it hit you. And I also, you know, I'm thinking about like how easy it is for us to rapidly read books, right? You know, and sometimes it's just the way that, you know, the schedule is going and you just have one book after another. But I also think about the fact that some books are not meant to be read rapidly. That some books, like, you know, we go back to the whole idea of consumption and how sometimes, like, the best meals, if we're thinking about food, are the ones that you kind of like eat slowly and savor. And this seems just from all of the ways that you've described it as something that should be savored. And each morsel should be kind of consumed in a thoughtful manner and not something that's just kind of simply inhaled. So I think I'm, as someone who kind of can sometimes read quickly, I'm going to take that into account when I sit down to read this book. I'm not going to inhale it. I think I'm going to just slowly eat it and enjoy every page for what it's giving me and how it's nourishing me, because it does seem like the kind of story that is nourishing, and those are the best kind of stories.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for
Well,
this chat and our first must read of
thank you.
2026. We'll see. And
Yeah,
happy
and I mean, what a great.
birthday to you, Sarah. Happy birthday. A great day ahead for you and a great year ahead for you as well. I just know it.
Thank you. The best way to celebrate my birthday is chatting with you. So,
Bye.